FME OK. Welcome to the Stream Home Edition. Today we're talking about education in India and how well your education goes in India. Well, it depends. Are you a boy or a girl? Do you live in a rural area or an urban area? How much does your family have to fund your schooling? And then on top of that, we add coronavirus and it becomes a very challenging educational environment. Millions of kids are being impacted by this in India. We are going to be talking about the learning gap in India. If you have a comment, a question, some experience, weigh in on YouTube, jump into the comments, and you too can be part of today's conversation. Hello, guests. It's really nice to see you. I am going to say hello to the guests. The guests will say hello to you. Prativa, welcome to the stream. Tell everybody who you are.
Hello, Femi. I'm Prativa. I'm based in Delhi. I work with an organization called Center for Budget and Governance Accountability. We work on public policy and public financing, especially budget. And my area of research is mainly I lead the education financing in institutions.
We're looking forward to using your knowledge and hearing your stories in the stream. Banayak, welcome to the stream. Tell everybody who you are.
Hi, Femi. My name is Binayak. I'm the founder of ThinkZone. So we are a social enterprise which implements quality early grade education programs using a tech plus and activity-based pedagogy. So as a direct response to the COVID crisis and the education that has been like that which has remained a problem, what we have started off is a home-based learning program for children who don't have access to smartphones and the internet.
And we're so lucky to have in our conversation Anita to bring all of your experience in education to this show. Welcome to the stream. Tell our international audience who you are.
Thanks. I'm Anita Rampal. Have been teaching at the Delhi University Faculty of Education, but involved since decades on trying to make education equitable, good quality, meaningful for all our children from diverse backgrounds, and part of large national campaigns from the ground for the right to education and for literacy for adults and neo-literacy.
Good to have you.
Great I've been involved in policy making also.
All right, very good. All right, so we're going to use your experience very well during this show. All right, the reason we are doing this conversation is because Anamika contacted us and said, you really need to look at education in India, and she suggested the show. Here she is.
The issue of education gap is important because it perpetuates entrenched inequalities. Here in India, the Right to Education Act is often celebrated, but it's still unable to ensure equity in the delivery of quality education. If you look at expenditure data, it's evident that the top 5% of households spend almost 120 times the monthly amount put aside by the bottom 5% for education. So the right to go to school alone is not enough, especially now since the shift into an online environment has laid bare the digital divide. Poor students have fewer learning opportunities due to erratic power supply, weak internet, and lack of devices. And aside from short-term loss of learning, this will most definitely cause a long-term loss in human capital and economic opportunities.
There's a lot to talk about. Professor, I'm just wondering, just as a starting point, what have you noticed that COVID-19 has done to kids trying to learn in India? What's the impact been?
It's been a devastating impact in the ways, and education and schooling is just one part of it. Millions of people have been displaced, have had to go back to their villages, migrant workers lost livelihoods, completely sort of economically crushed, and children had to walk hundreds of thousands of kilometers back home. So there are all kinds of anxieties, and school is just one small part of it. I'd also like to specify here that I don't like to use the word gap. That's too limited a way of looking at it. What Anamika said, education or schooling loss is a much better word for us, because we are contending with a lot of pressures which only talk about outcomes, and they say, forget the inputs. Don't think about inputs for poor children. Only think of outcomes which should come out of their heads or come out of some tests, which is very damaging. So that's why I would like to say schooling, it's a part of their lives, but they're really going very, very anxious and difficult time, including their families. And we have to look at them in a holistic manner.
Prativa, at the beginning of the lockdown for schools, there was a different impact for teachers who worked in government schools and teachers who worked in private schools. Tell us about the government school teachers, first of all. What happened to them?
Right. So, initial days of lockdown, that teachers in government school are basically deployed for COVID duty. So they were doing ration distribution. They were supervising the quarantine centers, because most of the schools has converted into quarantine centers. They were doing serving contaminated zone. At the same time, they were also preparing for online classes, because they need to teach the students, the children, and so there is double burden of work with them. And this is the contractual teacher who are there in the government schools. Their situation was much worse, because they are even not getting the salary very regularly. So that are two major things that has come out when I was interacting with the teachers. But other than those things also, I want to mention that a very different aspect, because teaching is more of a closed door affair between a teacher and a student. And when the digital education comes, it opens to virtual community, especially parents. So many government teachers have shared that they are getting bullied by parents, because they couldn't meet the expectation that parents have from them. And also there is gender dynamics involved in this whole process, because in India about 42% are female teachers. So besides work hour, most of them are also need to spend time handling houseworks, care responsibilities, or even homeschooling for their own children. So this was the situation, and even this is continuing now.
Binayak, I'm just looking at ThinkZone India on the Twitter, improving learning outcomes of children from under-resourced communities using a tech plus touch model and activity-based methodology. What did COVID-19 do to your approach, Binayak? What happened?
Yeah. Yes. So Femi, when the lockdown happened, the first things that were closed obviously were educational institutions, because all our programs were implemented in government schools and in Anganwadis. So our work was halted just when the lockdown happened. So what we did as an organization is shifted our approach from a completely physical implementation to virtual mode. So when we are talking about virtual mode in the country, the only thing that we could think of was what you could talk about was smartphones and internet. You use video calling to get lessons, or those kinds of things. So what we did at ThinkZone was use non-internet enabled solutions, because we knew that in the communities where we are working, and this is actually the case across rural India, that people don't have access to smartphones and the internet. So what we have implemented for the past 4 months is using voice-based calls and SMS to solutions directly to children and parents. So what we have done here is that we are not dependent on smartphones and internet, because we know that in the communities where we are working, the digital infrastructure is weak, and most of the families can't afford smartphones. So the
Okay.
idea was very simple. We could never replace the physical mode of learning, but then we did not want that children's education gets halted during the time. So that is where we have been implementing home-based learning programs in Odisha, and we have been reaching out to more than 10,000 children over the past 4 months with our program. Yes, the scale is small when you compare across the country, but then yes, we have seen very good results for our home-based learning programs.
All right, all right. Prativa, what are you writing down? Obviously, Binayak inspired you. Share your note with us.
Sure. So what Binayak is saying, it's good that we are improving the situation, but the it's really minuscule, because there is the disparity across rural, urban, girl, boys. It's tremendous. So when after lockdown the school shifted to traditional classroom to digital classroom, there was not much planning. There is already rural-urban education divide, and online education reveals that the prevailing disparity in virtual world too. Uh, for digital learning, you need three basic things. Vinayak was talking about mobile phone or not internet connection, but access to electricity is a very basic thing for online education. And unfortunately, when India is, we show data that 100% households have electricity connection now, but the quality of supply is very poor, especially in rural India. Let me give you some figure. Only 50% households actually receive electricity for less than 12 hours. And a survey has also shown that 7% households actually reports there is no sort of power outage. And coming to device, whether it's a computer, laptop, or desktop or phone, whether only 4% rural families has computer, and for urban this figure is 23%. And even we need to keep in mind here that not necessarily all these children or household have the knowledge of operating this system. And
All
when
right.
coming
So,
to the, yeah.
yeah, so sorry, Prativa, just finish up. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I was talking about the internet connectivity. India is now the second largest hub for internet connections, and now this is internet based. But in rural India, only 50% households have access to internet services, and this is three times higher in urban India. And we need to keep in mind that digital consumer and digital learner, these are very two different things. So having internet connection is not like having a predictable quality of internet connection. Poor
All right.
connectivity,
So, yes.
signal drop, cable cut, everything is an issue in the rural India.
All right,
Yeah.
I hear you, and YouTube is listening to you very clearly. So, RBR says this. I'm going to share this with you, Professor. Sadly, in India, the arrogance of the bureaucracy will destroy education. Is that what you mean by input and output, Professor?
What I mean is that here, for now, for at least 10 years, we are hearing, and much more now in policy, which has just come 2 weeks back, that loosen all elections, don't think about quality. The policy actually says only look at outcomes, so anyone can come and start a school with any kind of teacher, even a volunteer, even someone who hasn't herself done schooling. I mean, that's what our policy is saying. And that is what we have been fighting for. I mean, we got a Right to Education Act which said that a child, it's a fundamental right for her to get quality, equitable quality. And we are struggling against this in India, which is there even in rich schools, that a teacher can stand at a blackboard and dictate, or the students just have to stare at a screen or a blackboard. That is not education. And I'm disappointed that someone as enthusiastic as Vinayak, who looks to be at the ground, should try to justify something on a telephone, on SMS, or on call and call it education. Please don't call it education. Just call it activities or some fun or some games. Don't call it education. It goes
All right,
against
Professor,
the
I'm
very
going to pause
struggle
you
which
for a
we
moment.
for several
Professor,
decades.
Professor, I have to pause you for a moment. I'm so sorry. As we're talking about internet and technology, your internet is failing you as well. So I apologize about that. Last week, we spoke to Dr. Vikram Hashad Patel. He's a psychiatrist. He was on the stream, was getting quite upset about how the idea of let's go digital, let's use tech, because he says not every kid has access to this. And he had another idea. Here he is.
Think you've hit the nail on the head. This idea that we can move everything digital completely, ignores the fact that a large number of the world's children live in communities where either they have no access to devices or they have no access to the internet. And I think we have to acknowledge that these are the most vulnerable children of all, because they often come from families that actually have suffered the harshest results of the lockdown and other containment policies. So one example of actually addressing that is the fact that we now know that being outdoors, and luckily for us, the northern hemisphere is in the middle of its summer, being outdoors is extremely safe. If children are actually outdoors under a tree, as they did in the old days in India, you had your classes under a tree with your teacher, actually the risk is next to zero. So why can't we actually reimagine schools as not being in buildings that are closed with all the windows shut, but instead schools being out in parks where kids can actually meet under a tree with other kids and their teacher in a zero risk environment, but also one in which all the functions of the school are being fulfilled.
So that was Vikram suggesting a whole different way of just rethinking how do we do education in India right now. I want to add one more thought here. This is from YouTube and Brandon. Brandon says, how are Indian schools dealing with social distancing right now? Professor, you're teaching at the moment. How are you teaching? Are the kids able to stay
No,
6 feet away from each other?
our schools are closed, our colleges are closed. There's no teaching on. To open them right now. We have 60,000 new cases coming every day. So what we're doing is that in those districts where there may be no infections, at a very localized level with volunteers and some teachers, at a small level, they can interact in person with students coming, but keeping at a distance. But that's not teaching and that's not schooling. That's what I'm trying to underline here. Pressure by the rich and the privileged to say that schools should go on and can go on online, but they cannot. Even in my university, there were barely 20% students. This is the heart of the country. This is a big 20% of actually access online. So let's not talk about this as an option. Let's not allow the rich schools to go on thinking that this is the way they'll progress and they'll finish the syllabus. Because it's
All right.
not education for them either.
So,
This is Nicole.
yes,
Nicole is on YouTube. Binayak, I'm going to give this to you. Nicole
yes.
says we have rural households where there may be 3 to 4 children and only a single smartphone. It's not that easy for children to simultaneously learn from a single device. Binayak, pick up on that.
Yes. So Femi, the thing over here is that we know as a fact that not all the people in India have access to smartphones. And Pratibha did mention about some statistics where we know the penetration, internet penetration, and the amount of number of smartphones in the under-resourced communities is very less. So the talk of using smartphones or internet as one of the modes of access to learning or education, which Professor Anita is disagreeing that this can't be, modes of access to education. So my point over here is that be yes smartphones or not be smartphones, that can't be the only mode of access to education. So I just wanted to continue on this point, Femi, when Professor Anita mentioned that education, what we at ThinkZone are doing and what people are doing over digital medium also using internet and smartphones and mobile application are modes of access. This challenge of providing access to education in a physical format, or you can say in a completely online virtual format, was always there before COVID. So it was the education, the entire, you can say, quality of education was always a challenge in such a big country like India. So what we had, or when this crisis happened, we actually, as a country as a whole, we did not have a very large solution which could reach out to millions of children at the same time. So there we had organizations like ThinkZone and other civil society organizations, social enterprise, non-profits, including the government also, trying out different ways of medium to reaching out to children. Like as I mentioned before in the show also, that we can never replace the physical mode of learning. That can
Okay.
never be replaced.
All right.
and
So that
and
is
my
very,
point over
that's
here
very,
is that,
yeah. hmm
yes,
That's
so
very
my
clear.
point
Right.
over here is that, yes, exactly, yeah.
Yeah. I want,
But the
there's one more.
government is trying to replace.
Yeah. I hear the debate here, and the
That's the
debate is
problem.
happening on YouTube as well. I can hear you on YouTube debating backwards and forwards about digital divide and technology, etc. Thank you for all of those comments. Something that I really wanted to touch upon, and it's really, really important, is what happens to the girl child already in India. Education for young women, for young girls, is behind the education for young boys and young men. Why is that? Let me have a listen to Isha Mishra. She's an activist, and this is something she's very concerned about, particularly during the age of COVID.
Our former Prime Minister, Mr. Nehru, said that the most reliable indicator of country's character is the social position of a woman. And according to 2011 census, women literacy rate in India is 64.6%. And still, access of education for a girl child is a major concern for us. There are many reasons behind this. I just want to share some of them. First is conservative traditionalism. Second is society and mindset. And third is lack of basic infrastructure and safety measures, right? To overcome this problem, we just keep women education in the center of our policy designs, and we need to change the idea of implementation, which is really a top-bottom approach.
Prativa, what do you know in terms of your stats and your studies that you've been looking about where girls are in terms of educational achievement in India at the moment?
Right. So what Isha mentioned, I just want to say that this pandemic has started undoing whatever progress we have achieved in girls' education so far, and it would have lasting impacts. One statistics I want to mention here about gender-based digital divide. So among the internet users, only 6% are men and only 33% are women, and that disparity is more prominent in rural India, where the figures are 72% and 28%. The other point that Isha hasn't mentioned, but I think it's very important to mention here. See, learning, going to school is not only about learning, and because there are many other aspects which is associated with it, that social protection, nutrition, health, emotional support, everything. So coming to the nutrition point, we have a program in India called midday meal, which gives nutritious food to school children in lunch. Now, because schools are closed, the midday meal is not there. The court order is there for providing ration or cash. But what is happening, there is irregular supply. A large number of girls, actually studies have shown that the reason for coming to school is midday meal, and for many of them this is probably the whole meal in a day. Since there is already, we know that women or girls are food insecure even in their own family, and when the midday meal is not there, this results in malnourishment. Also, menstrual hygiene, safety at home, these are a very serious issue. We have seen reports that there will be probability of increase in child marriage, teenage pregnancy, and when comes the patriarchy is there. So when comes the inter-household allocation of this device and internet connection, it is true that it should be gender biased, and this will limit girls' ability to engage with the whole homeschooling altogether. So we may see that even if school reopens, many of them will not continue their study. Uh, Another factor is also there, I want to mention here, is the patriarchy that Isha mentioned here. So it's always the case that when it comes to schooling, preference is there for son than girl. Since the economic condition is such that maybe many of the parents won't be able to pay the school fees, and that, or they need to go out for a job, so girls need to take the role of household chores, they need to look after their siblings, or maybe they need to join labor force to help their family. So these are the situation we can foresee, and which will really severely impact the girl education.
Let me give you some of the thoughts that are coming from YouTube at the moment, discussing about how successful online education can be. The idea also on YouTube that people are suggesting is that access to the internet should be available for everybody in India. That would be a good start. And then this really, really sad comment from G. Savik. G. Savik says, I currently am a student doing my 12th grade in India right now in this pandemic. And trust me, things are completely destroyed here. as if the system was any better. So some despair there from our YouTube commenters. Thank you, Prativa. Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Binayak, for being part of this conversation. I should also say that we never have enough time to have a debate on the stream. We always leave you wanting more. Thank you, YouTube commenters, for being in this conversation. Let me tell you where we always pick up when we develop a show. We have the conversation on the show, but you can also go to Instagram Live. We have a Q&A every Sunday through to Wednesday at 16:30 GMT. You can jump on the AJ Instagram site there and be part of that conversation as well. Guests, thank you very much. YouTube, thank you very much. I will see you next time. Femi OK signing off from the Stream Home Edition studio. Bye-bye.